Okay. Hi, and welcome everyone to the Sands of Time, the End of Life Journey and Beyond. My name is Lisa Strahs-Lorenc, and I am a bereavement specialist. Hello, Susan. Welcome. Hi.
Hello, Lisa. So nice to see you this week. I'm Susan Capurso, end-of-life doula and legacy specialist. So I'm very excited about our guest today. Lisa, you're going to tell us a little bit about her right now.
I am, and we met on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to meet people.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yep. So today we welcome our guest, Dr. Cynthia Olney. As a grief and life coach, she can provide skill support that helps the person bear the intense emotional experience of grief. She can lead you through proven techniques that help you through the important work of grief integration. And when you're ready, she'll help you find your way back to connection, joy, and life purpose. Her certifications include the Martha Beck Training Institute, Life Coaching, and the School of Accompanying the Dying, End of Life Doula Training. Additional training in grief work comes from the Institute of Life, Breath, and Death. Her PhD is in educational psychology with an emphasis in human learning and development. Welcome, Cindy. It's really good to see you. And thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this field.
Well, I think the interest in supporting people through death, of course, came when my first experience with death was my mother died in 2018. And it was hard. She was 86 and she had been sick for a long time, but going through that year of just getting used to the fact that she was going to die. And then when she died, I felt alone, felt really alone through the whole thing. And I didn't know what to expect because I wasn't in contact with anybody who could really support me. I also learned that I was able to be present with her through her dying. I was with her when she died. And I recognized that also as a strength. Not everybody feels like they can do that. And it started out where I wanted to be an end-of-life doula. But I hadn't done much bedside work. So I decided I would get a life coaching background, I get some training, but I'd also volunteer as a hospice. And then 2020 happened, around 2019, all that was going on. And the hospice I trained in, I had one person I worked with, and then there was no volunteers going into any homes. And through the next years, I started to focus on the life coach part and realize what I really cared about were the people who are still here trying to grapple with the loss of somebody who died. That it's a much more active role. I started to come to terms with the fact that the patience of sitting vigil with people is probably not as fit with my personality as actually working with people in a more life coaching capacity. And so that's how the grief coaching part, that's why I grew that side of it. And I don't really, they don't practice as an end-of-life doula, but my awareness of death and my ability I do work with people who have anticipatory grief so that they are starting to process what they're seeing as their person is getting close to death, I think is of value to my clients.
Absolutely. Cindy, I'm so excited to hear more. I don't know if you're recognizing this, Lisa, but Cindy and I have a lot in common.
Yes.
We've done many of the same things. I'm still a hospice volunteer, started as the end-of-life doula, and you find your way in your practice. I've been in my business now 6 years, and you find your strengths and you find the different things that you like to focus on a little bit more. And I found legacy work, telling people stories, at the end of life. This is something that I thrive on a lot now in my business. But there's nothing, I don't want to say wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing that you can go through these different roles until you find what really resonates with you, because that's how you can be the best you can be.
Yes.
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Now you're in both of us, and it's really interesting because your studies were a little different. I mean, you know, I have background in counseling, but how fortunate you are that only, you know, back in 2018, I mean, you don't know this, Susan does, but my mother died when I was 2 and she was 26. And my
Yeah.
father died when I was 30 and he was 57. And my new mom died when I was 46 and she was 72. And my husband died when I was 55 and he was 56. So the constancy of death was always in my life.
Mhm.
And I learned to what life means and how to live around death. So each of us have our perspectives.
Well, and
Okay.
I think, Lisa, I'm glad you said that, because something I'd like to add here. I feel as though my parents, I lost my father in December, so now I'm grappling with being an orphan, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I, at first, before I started to really dig into what I was doing, I thought, what do I have to bring to someone who's lost a child or has lost someone to, I mean, I've had clients that have lost their, you know, their people to taking drug use. I've had people who have lost, a lot of people have lost spouses. It's like, what can I do for them? How can I help them? And then as I began to understand what people truly need to help them grieve, I realized that's a strength, because I go into our relationship believing that I have no idea what you're going through. Lisa, I'm sure every one of the grief that you had for each of those people, completely different, right? It was
Absolutely.
not the
Yep.
same.
Yep.
None of us grieve in the same way. And none of us grieve the same way every time.
Right.
And what people need is somebody who's like is able to witness and see and just be steady in the presence of whatever they tell us. And I think that's what the end of life doula brings for me, is that I am ready to hear it.
Yes.
Right.
But I attended one of your workshops and I'd love you to go through some of your perspective because it is different.
Mhm.
It brings, you know, your education and some of your perspectives and background. And it's very interesting to me. I learned a lot from it. So
Thank you. Yeah, that is, so one of the things that it took a little while, and it was only in some books that have come out, I'd say in the last 3 or 4 years, that I started to understand why my educational background is uniquely fitted to this type of work. I tell people now that I distinguish grief from grieving. Grief is an emotion, and I see emotions as messages from our intuition and our instinct. So that when you have that emotion, you need to decode it. You have to figure out, what is it telling us? And with grief, it's saying you have, or you're about to lose somebody or something precious and irreplaceable, and it's out of your control. And you need to stop and and process that. You need to spend time with that. So what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean, spend time with it? Well, the grieving part of it is learning. And that comes from, I mean, that's starting to emerge in a lot of, there are several researchers in this area, Mary Frances O'Connor, George Bonanno, who's done a lot of work with trauma and grief, the connection, that what's happening is that your life changes every time somebody close to you leaves. And the more entwined they are in your life, the more earth-shaking it is, because we feel safe through our relationships. Humans have to have relationships. So when somebody close to you leaves, you have to relearn that the world is safe. And you have to relearn that you can live in the world without them. You have to relearn it. So the learning and development part of it fits perfectly. How do we learn? To a certain extent, you have to learn new things. You have to learn to take over the stuff that they did. You have to learn, especially for a spouse. A lot of people get thrown financially when they lose a spouse. They are not ready for the impact. It doesn't mean they're in trouble, but it means suddenly they're in charge when they might not have been. So that's learning, right? You have to actually remember how to learn things. And then the development side of it, as I learned it, is that we learn through crisis and resolution. I mean, we learn when really tough things happen to us. Some of them are good, some of them we want, but they change our lives. And the development is how we learn to adapt and grow to live the new normal. So I feel now, as I've come full circle, like I'm using that background and that training. And it also makes me appreciate, and I help my clients to appreciate, you're going to be exhausted because you are learning. And you're learning, it's like you take the worst class that you've had to take, that somebody forced you to take. You couldn't get a degree, you couldn't graduate. You have to take it and then take it to the 100th degree. And think of how tiring that would be.
Yeah.
And there's no opting out. There's no opting out.
It was financial literacy. So yes, I remember that. But now I was just wondering, as you said this, doesn't this depend upon the background and experiences of the person, their personality, the things they've gone through, maybe the support they've gotten in the past? Doesn't that all affect how they're going to process and learn now this, and create this new life for themselves?
Absolutely, it is. And I mean, I have a blog post that's coming out very quickly. That is the start of the grieving process, is to sit down and take an assessment of that. Because there is a collection of things that it's like you dumped in the wilderness and you have to start orienting your way out. And that's the beginning. It's like, why should I feel this way? Instead of like, I think an impulse for all of us now is when something happens to us, we want to know, okay, is this normal? We want to know that what we're going through is normal because it makes us feel like we're going to get over this, right? If we look like everybody else. So you go on to Google and essentially come up with questions that are saying, am I normal? And that's not the question. The question is, why should I expect this? Why is this normal for me? Why am I feeling this way?
Mm-hmm.
And it is the process of exploring that is a first step for trying to figure out, okay, how do I move forward?
So then they get a better understanding of themselves and where they've been in their lives.
And also, that's true. And I also think it's really important. We have a tendency to remember all the hard things about life and all the things that haven't worked for us in the past, because those are the important things to remember, right? That's a survival instinct. So of course, that's what our memory is going to prioritize. But I work with people that the gratitude exercise that I like to tell people to do is I want you to go back to these times in your life when you've had a dramatic change. And they might have been welcome. You got married, you started college, you started a new job, you changed jobs, you moved. And look at how hard that was. And look at how you got through it. You got through it to a certain extent, luck or the universe taking care of you, whichever fits for you. You got through it because people showed up that you never knew would show up. There were people there for you. Remember those people and how they helped you and how you reached out to them. And then the third thing is, how did you rise to the occasion? You rose to the occasion. You figured it out. How did you do it? So that you can start building a sense of, yeah, this is going to be long and hard, but I've seen in the past, I've gotten through this stuff. This is probably 10 times worse, but I have the structure, I have the foundation, and I have the experience.
I think, you speak so incredibly well, and you're very clear and easy to understand. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that piece of it is so important because we just did a video recently, Lisa and I, about when you're just stuck and the months go on and maybe the years go on and you can't get out of it. You don't know the first thing to do and what to say, and you become so extremely depressed that the blanket's over you every day. Mm-hmm. And we gave, examples of that kind of situation. And I think by you explaining it just like you did, it's beautiful, because you know who I'm talking about, Lisa, the person that we had behind when we did this video. And had they been taught about this or heard about this and known that this was the first step in all of your baby steps to move forward, this is the first step. And that has to be done before you can get to the following steps. I don't know if I'm sounding clear enough when I say that, but you made so much sense. And yes, that has to be done first before you have to know that it's a learning process.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to know that I will be able to do this. Everybody does do it. You will be able to do it too. It'll be hard and long, and nobody says that to people though.
And let me tell you, I think maybe, you know what, it's knowing it's a learning process and knowing you can decide to get better. And then start thinking about what are you willing to do. I am not the right person for everybody. When there are, therapists that do things I don't do, that help people kind of truly, they need a different type of support to adapt to what happened to them. There's also something that's important is some somatic experiencing, which means working with, there are different modalities that are going past the head and helping people deal with the nervous system. And I can do a little bit of that, but it's knowing that being willing to go to whoever can help, like keep finding, like it's the person you talk to, the therapist you talk to, the coach you talk to, the counselor you talk to, that doesn't work, then keep trying something new.
Yeah.
Right. Might not be the right fit. We all have different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, somebody's attracted chemistry wise to somebody else. That's why, Lisa and I really appreciate doing this channel together, because we're very different people.
We are.
We are. And she's got sometimes a different opinion than I do, but that's what gives you the whole, and people are able to learn from the two of us bringing our perspectives in.
Yes.
And you just said it well. So I love the fact that you're telling our viewers today that it's important to learn, to know that it's a process, just the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
that you'll be learning and you'll be growing through this, and you have to accept that first important step.
Yeah. And it may take you a little while. Be patient with yourself, even believing that.
Of course.
It may take you a while. I mean, the initial reaction is often a numbness or a shock. And then, as the realization comes in, it may take a while. And let's face it, it's a heavy energy, right? Grief can stop you in your track, and just be patient with yourself for even reaching out for help. It's
It
normal.
still does. It does. And I do what I do because within a 2-year period, I lost 14 people in my life.
That's a lot.
Okay. Friends, cousins, in-laws, best friends, my husband, all different kinds of people, relationships in my life. And yet I had known a woman that I became very good friends with for about 5 years, which is nothing compared to the 14 other people that I lost. But she died a year ago, and oh boy, I have such a hard time with that loss. And
Yeah.
I wonder why, when I didn't with people that were in my life for 50 years,
Yeah.
or
It's like a soulmate kind of loss.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
every loss was completely different for me. So I understand what you mean exactly by that.
Well, and Susan, you talk about your storytelling, the story, the legacy, and telling stories. I mean, that's how we learn also. I mean, it's sort of like the death of somebody, whether it's I mean, it's all traumatic, right? I mean, but it's just that some deaths are more sudden and, almost feel like they feel more violent and that kind of thing. But as humans, it's like we always have these sensory things that are, when you are around somebody who's dying, it's a sensory experience. But as humans, we sit and we reflect and we start to order things, and we start to have a beginning, middle, and end. And that is a reassuring structure that helps us we start to feel more in control, just if we can put it in order. So the story is what we all learn by. It's how we understand how we feel about things. It's critical. Right. It's critical to healing.
You have some really great slides that are different perspective on how you work with people and how you see the process. I really enjoyed those. Would you like to share some of those, because they're really interesting? And as I said, they're different perspective than just a traditional grief kind of work.
Okay. I hadn't thought about which ones to share. I have a couple that I've put together here.
Okay.
So, all right, let me go through a couple.
Sure.
Share my,
That's
keep your
all right.
fingers crossed that I can get this right.
That's
There we
okay.
go. Okay. All right. So tell me when you think maybe, can you all see it?
Sure. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
One of the people that have influenced the work I do is Claire Bidwell Smith. She's written a lot. She is a therapist who specializes in grief and has some really good books out there for helping people. By the way, one of my closest, a friend who's so close that she's like family, lost her husband and her parents, and she also found Claire Bidwell Smith to be very comforting. So I'm somebody who likes for what I learned, but I just want to attest to the fact that she's a lot of people get a lot from this. And she said, resilient grieving, it's a proactive process. So thinking as something you can do, a way to engage with your feelings and your experience. On the one hand is allowing yourself to cry and mourn. And mourning is the outward expression of grief. So it's important to express it outwardly. But it's also starting to take a look at your coping methods and you start to reshape your life. So the term resilient grieving, from what I can tell, came from another researcher and griever, Lucy Hone. And she talks about it as the resilience as bringing together your own abilities, your own strengths, and your own core beliefs, and putting them together in processes and practices that help you not only process your grief, but start moving into a new chapter of life that's more authentic and more aligned with who you are. So we talk about grief never really going away, but if you think of a bell jar, it's like the first jar, it's very small, right? And the ball takes up, and it's not like the grief gets any smaller, but you get bigger and bigger because you grow and grow and grow so you can handle it. And that's what resilient grieving is. It's saying, I am going to get better and I'm going to find ways to do it. And there are ways. We know things that work really well are reflection, like through journaling and meditation and spending some time with your thoughts, but also expressing them outwardly to other people. Sharing stories is a part of that process, and ritual actually tends to help too. I don't know about you all, but I come from a culture that doesn't believe in funerals. My parents had wanted nothing to do with funerals, and a lot of people, it's like my loved one did not want anything. They didn't want people coming together and being sad and crying. And what I'm starting to tell people when they say that to me, it's like, yeah, it's not about you. You're not going to, it's about your person. You have to think about what they need, and they need time with their friends and people they need to spend time with people who loved you as much as they did, because that's part of the healing process.
Now, instead of funerals, we talk about celebration of life. I don't ever talk about it as a funeral.
Yeah.
It is
and memorials
a way of celebrating a person's
right.
life.
I can't tell you how many people, I mean, that was my feeling with my parents. It's like, I don't want people getting around being sad. No, I mean, it was like, no, we're not doing that. So I always tell people what I did was a movable wake. So what I did was I went and visited their friends and talked to them. That was how I did it. It took me a long time, but I recognized that I needed that, and that I had a pretty good idea that their friends did too. So, and a lot of their friends couldn't have come to a funeral anyway, so it kind of worked out.
I love hearing that. I've never heard of somebody put it that way.
Yeah, me too.
A movable wake.
Or do that. And I like it. That's nice.
And my partner wants a roast, by the way. He wants everyone to tell jokes and roast him.
Yeah.
Which, is an interesting perspective too. He doesn't want anybody sad about him and his life. So, yeah, it's great. All right, 6 needs of mourning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this comes from Alan Wolfelt, who's probably one of the best. I don't know, Lisa, if either of you have come across him, but he's written like 104 books on the grieving process. But he talks about the 6 needs of mourning, and the title is awkward to me because these seem to me like activities that you do. They are like morning activities. Like, what are you expressing? What are you, as you go out and try to work through your grief process, what are you trying to do? And the first one is acknowledging the reality of death. And that sounds sort of odd, but one of the things I've come to understand is how human intelligence works. It's part of the, my ed psych background. How do we learn stuff? Well, we learn stuff to a certain extent through mentors and people teaching us things. And that sort of fits our logical brain that's trying to catch information and use it for, predicting problem solving and predicting what's ahead and planning for problems and being able to look out for things. But we also learn through experience. And what I've come to understand is that when somebody dies, our brain gets it really fast. It understands really quickly. They're just facts about death that mean a person is no longer with us. People declare, you have clinicians that will come in and declare that they've passed, they're not talking, it's like logically you get it. But the part of you who's always known them to be there, like the people that you love dearly, you have a sense of where they are. Like if you've had kids or if you have friends or spouses, like they might not be with you all the time, but you kind of know where they are and you know how to get in touch with them. And that part of you that lives like that has to bit by bit learn through experience, not knowledge, that they're not there. And that's why, really typical experience is something happens and your first instinct is to call your husband or wife.
Well, that's what I did. As soon as I went back to work, which I went relatively within the first week or two, and I would leave the building. I worked at a corporate building, and I'd leave and walk out to my car and automatically take out my phone and call Jim. And I did this, and I get his voicemail, and it wasn't until I heard his voice that it clicked. And oh my God, I had a breakdown over that the whole ride home.
Yeah.
Because how silly of me. But it happens.
Yep. It's like a lot of, and it's real fast at the beginning, but this can go on for quite, for some people for a year or two where you keep stumbling over settings where you expect them to be. Grocery stores seem to be a trigger point for a lot of people. They cannot stand grocery stores. Or they'll be in a grocery store and they suddenly go down an aisle. They don't need to go. They used to go there all the time to buy medical supplies.
Or to buy their spouse certain things.
Right.
That was a big for me, the hot sauce aisle, or he loved all these different kinds of foods. And every aisle that I saw these foods was like, what am I doing? I want to get out of here. You don't want to be there.
Yeah. I mean, and another one is the first time you fill out a form and they want to know what your marital status is.
Yes.
Oh.
Or you have to come up with an emergency contact. And, that's always something I'm terribly sensitive about because I always have to have emergency contacts with my clients. And sometimes they have to change it. And we take a breath and we take a moment.
Remind me, Lisa, we need to do a show on that, on the little things that you don't think about.
Yes. That's
so we can warn people ahead of time, when
they're good topic.
Yes. But you see, that's a part of you. It's like there's a part of you that is not going to know. There's just a part of us that doesn't learn through thought. It learns through experience. And that's acknowledging the reality of the death is talking about those moments, because each time you run up against a reality, you're acknowledging the reality of death in a different way. And it takes a while. These are not in any order. They're going to be a collection of experiences you can have depending on how close you were to the person, how long it might take. Another is embracing the pain of death. Sometimes there's this kind of, I always think of the first moments where you're almost, when my parents died, it was almost like I didn't feel like I was even quite real anymore. Like I was outside of reality. It's almost like a nerve block, right? And then bit by bit, the pain starts to come in, and learning how to tolerate and not resist the physical discomfort around grieving and the grief bursts that come through is a skill that can help people. Because when you allow yourself to feel it, a little healing comes along. But if you keep freezing it out, that's where you start to get stuck, is that you need to know how to, be able to surf those bursts of grief that come through. Remembering the person who died. This is why I think it's difficult for almost anyone to grieve without talking about their loved one. It's important to go out and talk to people who share memories with you. You can talk about them, and also if it can help to talk to people who don't know your loved one, but people who are really good at listening and drawing your story out. But remembering them, spending time in your memories with them is a way of honoring them, but it is also a part of, getting an understanding of the life that you're moving on beyond and having a sense of what you need, developing a new identity. We define who we are by our relationships. It's a big part of who we are. And so, as I said at the beginning, my identity has changed. I'm not a daughter anymore. I am, but I'm a different kind of daughter because my parents aren't here. And that has, the loss of my father is a significantly different experience than the loss of my mother, because my identity took a big change. I didn't have to grapple with the loss of having parents.
Let me just mention a book, by the way, for people who are relating to this. It's called The Orphaned Adult, and it is an amazing book about this same feeling.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden you don't have any biological links out there anymore, and who am I, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very good book. Excellent book. So, yeah.
And then searching for and creating meaning. I mean, this is odd, but that's what Susan, when we were talking about storytelling, that's what the telling stories about your person helps you. Talking through their death, I think it's really important if you've to tell at least one other person your experience of either observing your loved one passing or hearing about it and what it was like for you, and working through the events, because we have to make sense of it. Death is hard. We don't know anyone who's died, right? I mean, we've know people who've had near-death experiences, but we really don't know what that is for somebody to not exist anymore. And what's complicated is that humans, we're working off of virtual reality all the time, right? It's not what's out there, it's our perception of our lives. And so what's quite confusing is that person is not here on earth anymore, but they're still really alive in my head. How do I make sense of that? How do I define this new connection I have with them? A lot of times when you are looking at a death, especially if you've lost someone to an accident, maybe the best you can come up with is it's just random. I mean, that's just what happens. There's just things in life that I can't control, but that is an explanation and you have to come to it. Like, it's not like you can someone else can't tell you that.
Let's touch on more tragedies then. All right. Because I have 2 and 2.
Can I mention one other thing? The last thing is let others help you. Learn and accept that you are not going to get through this by yourself. And that independence, my clients seem to be highly independent people. And it is letting go of the idea that you need other people's help is sometimes another thing we have to work on a lot. Okay. So go ahead, Lisa.
So tragedies and all, including suicide, right? And trying to figure out how that makes any sense. And those of us left behind after those tragedies, how do you walk that through? How do you handle that?
So you do the 6 needs of mourning, but of course, where you work on things and where these are the processes that we go through. These are just kind of standard foundational practices, or you can think of them as tasks or things that we have to grapple with. But let's talk about suicide in particular, because I think that one, as I said, I had mentioned accidents. You know, we are often with accidents, we have to, you know, we can come to an idea of these are just sort of someone was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or, you know, there was something hidden we didn't know about, like people who die of heart attacks very suddenly. We weren't aware of that. It was covert problems. You know, those things are hard. They can be harder because they're more traumatic, and you need to work, you need to help the body go through, feel what it has to feel and facilitate that. But let's talk specifically about suicide and why it's particularly difficult. And there are really three parts of it that make it extremely, it's any death that fits into this, but suicide seems to be the big one. Is, first of all, it's highly traumatic. It's usually violent, and it's perceived as a violence. Not only, a lot of times the way we perceive when someone commits suicide, it's not just a violence towards himself, but it almost feels like something directed at us. So it is like the shock is going to be deeper, and it's probably going to take, I mean, it's going to take some real effort to be able to be with your body and help, you know, learn some techniques that you probably have never been taught on how to help yourself self-soothe and feel safe through some real anxiety that you're going to be feeling. The second one I think is really bad, that gets in the way. I'm going to go back a minute.
Mhm.
This is the one that I think really gets in the way of us supporting the survivors of, I don't like to say suicide survivors, because that sounds like people who have tried and haven't succeeded, but the people who have lost somebody to suicide, is guilt and shame. And I think that comes from a true misunderstanding of why somebody would kill themselves. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, a little bit more in depth. But also, it's hard. There are very few people that have the ability to overcome the drive for self-preservation, right? That is it's our survival drive, right? We are hardwired to live and to fight for our life. And it's a very small number of people who are able to overcome that. And that's why it's confusing to us. Like, we often cannot we cannot understand it. And that's where I think the guilt and shame come in. It's like, why didn't I know? Why didn't I understand? And the problem is that gets reinforced, because I think the people in our community often are having those same thoughts, and we aren't able to show up real authentically for each other. And I will tell you that, you know, I could tell you that I've had that happen to me, and I've watched it too when I've been more removed. And I've watched it. It just, like, families get so, it's like a pressure cooker for them, especially when we're talking about in-laws and that sort of thing. You're always looking for the person that dropped the ball, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Is there somebody to blame, or you could have helped more, or this?
it's that searching for and creating meaning is particularly hard, because most of us cannot understand why someone would do that. And then we redirect it on ourselves, right? It must have been me.
Right.
You
I
know,
could have done this, I could have done that to prevent it.
And I think anger should be in there too. Guilt and shame are two of them, but there's also anger. It's like, how could you have done that to me? It feels like something that's been done to you.
Right. Right.
And then you feel guilty because you realize that's not logical, right? Like, it feels that way, but it's not logical. And then the third is this crisis of meaning. It's like not being able to put that together. It's harder. It's a puzzle piece that's harder than for other types of death. So to me, the things that I think are really important, I think, for not just the people who have survived a loved one suicide, but also all of us at a social level, is to get the facts about the causes of suicide, understand that we're kind of thinking about it in the wrong way. I think that if somebody in your life has committed suicide, coaches and counselors help people identify what we call painful beliefs, which means you may be harboring beliefs about what happened that are not really factual. And if you look at them directly, you start to understand they're not factual and they're not helping you. And you can shift your perspective and it will bring you at least an element of relief. Sorry, I'm having to move my faces around here.
Is it helpful? Let me just ask you, is it helpful to think about a chemical imbalance that some
Yeah.
people cannot, and so it's not a cause that would directly be from any situation. It's that chemically they just can't, it's not. They
Oh,
just
oh,
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are two books that I think are really good, and I want to make sure I get the two books that I've read. One was called Night Falls Fast, which is written by a psychiatrist who studied suicide because she herself suffers from bipolar disorder. One of the things that she says is that, I mean, her book is exhaustive research. It's a little bit dated. It's from the 90s, but the research is exhaustive. And her conclusion is that there are three components. There's a genetic predisposition. So as I was saying, a lot of us really don't even have the capacity to do it. And then there's mental illness, and then there's a difficult circumstance. A lot of us focus on the life circumstance, and that's where the guilt comes in, right? We believe that if we had just done something different, you'll hear people say a lot, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I don't want to say I don't agree with that, but I do feel like it emphasizes that difficult life circumstance. But if the real trigger is what Dr. Redfield says, or Dr. Jameson says, is it's really the mental health component. That's the place that we have the control. And the key is to destigmatize mental illness and destigmatize treatment. We're in a world, I mean, I think our American culture particularly, we just believe if you have to use medicine, there's something, it's a weakness. And of course, I think also there's a problem that it's not always easy to get the right mix of medicine. So I would say it's more like a chronic, it's rather than a temporary, it's probably it might be a little more chronic. And we have to, if we think about that, is that easier in terms of helping people get help, but also understanding you can't do that. As the person who is trying to recover from having lost someone to suicide, you can't make those decisions for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
All three of those things are out of your control, and you can't protect somebody from difficult life circumstances. None of us can get through life without it.
Yeah, but we all want to save. We all want to save people, and especially the people who we love or who are close to us. So
yeah, and I think there are things that we can do. We can look out, and one of that is to be supportive and encouraging around the getting treatment and helping people understand that what they're going through, it's not just trying to figure out how to get through a difficult life circumstance, but it is to build yourself up, build your mental health up so that you're able to cope with it. But I think the other thing that's really important is that what they've found, and this comes from Dr. Thomas Joyner, who is a PhD clinical psychologist who has studied suicide. He said there are two things that people need they need to have a fearlessness about committing suicide. They have to feel not afraid of it. And that's where this genetic predisposition comes in to a certain extent, that it is your high risk takers who live life to the edge that are more able to contemplate the suicide as a
answer.
as a solution, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's coupled with a sense of burdening people or not fitting in. So that piece of fearlessness is, some people are just born that way, but people can habituate to it, right? So the one thing to look out for, and this is all I'm going to say about suicide prevention, is if somebody starts, it's practice. It's like if you start practicing those thoughts, you become more fearless, right? So you want to look out for anybody who's practicing, talking about it, thinking about it, or even does some, like, take some trial runs. And that's when that is when, if you're going to take action, that's where you start encouraging treatment, mental health treatment.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
And this is just something that you don't hear a lot. And it's something that's always been on my mind, because I did have a friend who committed suicide. And since then, I've heard it from a couple other people that the way that they choose to kill themselves, why is one more horrific than the other? My circumstance happens to be they hung themselves. And that's the story to somebody close in my family. It was their best friend, hung themselves. And my vision of that is take something and go to sleep. I mean,
That's
I
right.
hate to say it
That's right.
bluntly, this is such a sensitive topic, and I'm not being funny or silly.
Mhm.
But I've always thought, what's behind that method? And I know we probably can't even come up with an answer for that, because again, that might have to do with bipolar or mental illness or something. We don't really know the thought process that's behind that. But why do it in such a tragic, one of my best friends, her husband did it right before his daughter's college graduation on the back patio and just shot himself in the head with a gun. I don't know. Do people grieve differently with the process
Well,
that
I
they can?
think that what you're bringing up and what you're showing, what you're demonstrating, is how difficult it is to make sense of it, right?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
eludes us, which is what makes it particularly difficult. If somebody dies in a car accident,
Mhm.
you can put the cause and effect together, right? A car came around the bend, they didn't see it.
Yep.
It was bad weather conditions. They were tired and they fell asleep. Like, you can do cause and effect.
You're right. Or died in their sleep.
And what you're doing is you're trying to say, what,
Right.
why this? It's like you're pulling these pieces together, and it's really hard to fit them together. And it's one of the things is, I think we have to learn, is how to drop our resistance to the unknowing
Right.
and
Right.
say, at some level, there was something going on mentally that wasn't controlled through modern medicine for whatever reason, and this what seemed like to them the solution.
Right. And
Yeah,
some have
becoming
even tried those things, all kinds of electric, what do they call that? The thing
Yeah,
with
shock
the
therapy.
shock therapy. My cousin's mother-in-law went through all that stuff, and she seemed like she was getting better and all, and she threw herself out of a 21-story building.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I mean, that's the third piece of it, right? It is a type of pain that a lot of us don't understand.
Right, right.
A lot of people, a lot of us think we do. Like, I do. I thought for a long time. I've had some moments of true despair, especially when I was younger. But I wasn't anywhere close to it. Now I've come to realize, because it is a pain, I think, that is so deep that most of us don't understand. And, we just, and there's a terror. I think there's a terror, again, that terror that it's never going to change. It's like it seems to me, from what I've read,
Right.
that they're living a
well,
nightmare that they don't believe is going to end.
yes. And I like when you talk about the resiliency and knowing that, these feelings of safety, will come back. I've been listening a lot to Michael Singer lately. If you know him, The Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
He's written several books, and he has a series of podcasts that I just have to mention for anybody who wants to release and let things go and surrender to them. And beautifully, his words are beautiful with the way that he speaks about this. But he was talking about grief and a passing, and he he gave me an analogy that has been sticking in my head for a few days now, where, you're laying on a beach and you're laying on the sand and, you're just laying on your back, imagine, and the water comes up a little bit and it hits your feet a little bit and it might hit your legs a little bit. But then if it comes up strong and it's that feeling of the water that, I mean, your head doesn't go under necessarily, but the water comes up and it's so overwhelming and you're not in control. And suddenly, a minute later, it all goes back out again. And that kind of has to do with the waves of grief that we talk about, how it comes in and it goes back out. But just to know that the resilience that we're talking about, we're all capable of that. We're, as human beings, this is how death unfolds. So the more we know about it and learn about it, like the videos that Lisa and I do here, hopefully somebody will grab a piece of what we're teaching them, like you, Cindy, your amazing words, that it will help in some way.
And also, I want to add something I've gained a huge appreciation for, is that you can do that if you can't do it yourself. Having good grief companions, either professionals or just highly grounded, astute friends, you can borrow their energy. The word is we resource off of each other. If you are not feeling calm, if you're not feeling strong, if you're not feeling settled, the mere presence of somebody who is for a certain amount of time is going to help you. That is a real thing.
I love that. We don't talk about that, Lisa. Put that down for another video too. I love that. It's very true.
Yes, but let me just add that the friends who try to be there can be exhausted from that process.
Yes.
They can just drain you so much that you have nothing left. And that's the truth. Okay. You care about somebody, you love them, you want to do whatever you can for them. But honestly, you get to the point where it is just draining, really draining.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And the thing is, you need them a lot longer than they realize is the other problem. I mean, grief, most of us think that I think there's a belief that in about a month you should be on your way.
Yeah, no.
And that's where I think the help of working with professionals, or at least going to, finding grief support groups, some type of resource is really important, because you're going to need support a lot longer than your friends are going to.
And your friend may be able to handle.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed. Could you tell us a little bit about your typical client? And
Can I'm going to stop sharing now. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go back. Let's go
Great.
here. So I would say that I have a lot of people who come to me who are women, in terms of demographically, a lot of people who are women, I'd say like between 30 and 45, who are losing their mothers early or have lost their mothers early. And I think one of the reasons that happens is that they don't have peers that have gone through it. So they don't know how to explain their experience, and their friends don't relate to them. I think for some of us, a lot of us at my age,
they don't understand.
Right. So that's one. And it's lately I've been working with a lot of people whose parents are not dead and they're caregivers, and they are trying to grapple with the experience of being young and a caregiver and losing a parent. It's confusing.
Very hard. Very hard.
Right, because the population now. The baby boomers in our population, there's so many people now who have parents that they're taking care of.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and they're sandwiched because they're taking care of children, they take care of their parents. It is very difficult, very challenging.
And what's really interesting, Lisa, is they're parents of teenagers. So they're kind of dealing with some of the most difficult transition, like the people they're caring for going through their own really intense I mean, what's happening is the teenagers both groups often are fighting for independence, right?
Sure, sure.
They want to be
Yeah.
able to do more than is safe for them to do. Yeah.
Mhm.
And every once in a while they just get really, they need to remember that their loved ones are not the illness that they're suffering from,
Yes.
that their mother is not, you know, the cancer or the Parkinson's or the Alzheimer's that they are. I also have worked with spouses. That's the other, and significant others, the loss of spouses and significant others. And that is different because the learning curve is so much more intense. With with adult children, you've separated from your parents, right? And you're doing that. Like there's a lot of like all of the ins and outs of your relationships while they're still hale and hearty and interfering with your life. A lot of the conflict is around separation, right? Being your own person. So when they die, it's like the integration into your life. Your life is not as disrupted often. It is still, but it's not at the level that a spouse or a significant other that you lived with does. So for my, for the adult children, particularly if they've lost a parent, we're usually pretty, I mean, it's like about 6 to 8 sessions and they're doing well. They're starting to feel, I've got this, I know what to do. For people who have lost a spouse or have had to really rearrange their lives, it's often, 3 to 6 months because of just having to learn, like it's the life coaching part of it, having to rethink their life, having to rethink their future. So, if you've never worked with a life coach, some people find they benefit up to a year of working with us because of just becoming, you're rewriting your life.
Yes. I call it creating your new life. That's what I call it.
Yeah. Now I
Also-
would say in terms of the type of people, they are people who are used to being able to figure things out.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're used to being able to figure things out and they're at a loss. They know there's something, they believe there's something they can be doing, but they don't know what, and they don't know how to figure out if it's working or not. And
Right.
I've had a lot of educators. I tend to attract a lot of educators, which I think is interesting.
Sure. You need to give us the contact information for you. Let's do that.
So my slides, I have got a link where people can get the slides, and it has both a link to some resources. I want to mention with the resources, I have some resources for people who have survived loved ones who've committed suicide, but also I'm with a group that I work with, a group called the Serenity Circle. It's not necessarily for people who have loved ones who have committed suicide, but it's for people who have loved ones who have struggled with mental illness or drug addiction. And those two things, there's huge overlap in those groups, right?
Yeah.
Overlap. And so there's a link for that too, if anybody wants to look at those. So it's some resources. And then the other thing is my contact information. So I can put it either in the chat, or I can send it to you all, and you can put it with
or you want to share the slide now that has that contact information?
Share it now, and then, yeah, and then also, if you can just send that over to Lisa in an email,
Okay.
that would be great, because when she puts together the video, she can include that.
Yeah, I'll write it in this one.
Yeah, I'll send you the link for it.
Right.
These are the contact. That's the
resources.
The resources.
Excellent.
And then there's where you can find me. My company is Strahs-Lorenc Coaching. And or else you can give me an email. And also I do have a mailing list. Lisa came to one of my my free talk on grief, on the basics of grief. And I am planning on doing some more of those. One is on anxiety, because I've come to realize anxiety is a huge piece of grieving, right? Because you're anxious, you don't think you know how to do this. So I'm going to be doing some stuff on some other emotions, probably in the fall, some free talks. So if people want to be on my mailing list, they can get the heads up on that.
Right. Very good. Okay.
Should I
That's good.
stop sharing?
Yeah, you can. That's great.
All right.
This has
Thank
been
you.
very, very helpful and very
Okay.
informative. And again, each of us have a different perspective, even though we share some of the same space. So that's why I love this. It's
Oh,
great.
yeah,
For all of us.
absolutely.
Great for all of us. Yeah. Yeah.
It takes a village, right?
It does. It does. It does. We thank you so much for the
Oh, this
work
was
you
a
do
pleasure.
and your
Thank you for
time.
having me. I really appreciate it.
No, this is
Thank
going
you
to be
for
very
coming.
helpful.
Yes,
Yeah. Thank you.
very good.
Okay.
And Lisa, I will see you next
Yeah,
week.
we will.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your time today. And hopefully this will help somebody who needed it most this week, right?
Absolutely. Thanks again, Cindy. Great
Thank
meeting
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.